somewhere along the line, they thought I was the only person, as it were, because every other person withdrew, and said, look, listen.
Was that a strategy?
I think it was a strategy
because I remember feeling very let down. I called Dr. Birabi and Kenneth, my cousin, and everybody just seemed to melt away. People stopped taking calls. And I thought, what the hell? Nobody seems to care. You were the only one. Was it a strategy that you would be the only one?
No, I think that when they got to me and I received the training, other friends or mutual friends said, look, listen, let's do this through Uche. I think that with the training he has, we are going to do well in terms of what we pay and everything. So we sort of decided that every other person should hold on and let's see the progress. And if, for instance, my interaction with them breaks down, then we can activate another. So we didn't want so many people to be talking to them at the same time. So we sort of agreed that, look, every other person will call me. What is the update? Have they called you? Have you called them? And, it's a very complicated thing. At a point, they will go blank and they won't call you for days. At a point, if you recall, I explained to you, I started sending them credit because, for some days they will not call and then we will panic. And,
that was a strategy.
Yeah, I think that, just trying to recall it now, I think they wanted to make us panic.
That was the day. I remember the day I was hog-tied, like a goat going to market. They tied my hands, they tied my legs, and they put a pole across the roof of the hut where I was being held and hung me upside down. And then Boss Man, as they called their leader, started beating me with planks of wood. The others begged him because actually, out of the 9 guys in that hut, probably about 6 or 7 of them were normal human beings, really. But he was so angry about the withdrawal of the money and about you calling with such small amounts.
Absolutely.
And I remember being really angry with you because, as I said, 1 minute you call and you say 3.2 million. Next day, you say, okay, 3.3.
Yes.
Do you remember I spoke to you on one occasion? Yes. I screamed at you.
Yes,
now, what the hell is wrong with you?
Yes, absolutely. And you say, look, listen, this place, they're going to kill me. And then what about this? What about that? And, the kind of training I received, was such that whatever questions you asked me, I had a ready-made answer for you. So, and the frustrating part of it was that those answers do not actually affect the amount of money we were ready to part with, So that really, really made them very angry. Because I suspect that sometimes they will put us on speaker, while you are speaking, and they're also listening and everything. But because the guy who trained me had told me, listen, we have experience with this is how it goes eventually. And somehow, like a clockwork, that's how it happened. So, and as they became friendly and sort of trusted what I was doing, they were just calling to check, whether we had collected more money and everything. And, every time they called, they always gave you the phone to speak to your sister is alive.
Well, it's a pity my sister, Layla, isn't here, because she's the third part of the triangle, if you like, because she also spoke to them. She also had interactions with them. But she was quite angry and saucy. That's how we are in my family, the women. And she was quite rude to them. And she would say things like, I'm not effing talking to you until I speak to her. I want evidence that she's alive, you assholes, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I remember Boss Man saying to me, you see that girl, her mouth, her mouth. She's even worse than you are. You know what? If you're lonely here, we're going to go and collect her from the mainland and bring her to this mangrove swamp to keep you company. She's so saucy. Very saucy, useless girl.
Yes. I mean, I don't know who's the boss man, but there's this particular guy who always spoke to me and who
was boss man.
Initially was very harsh, but afterwards he sort of found out that I was committed to raising money. He was trickling in hundreds of thousands and everything. He was very frustrated about it. But because there was, we were told that whatever amount you gather, make sure that you write it down, make sure that you're able to mobilize it, and make sure that, at the end of the day, you're able to provide it. So he sort of saw me as quote unquote the only option he had. So at a point, he became quite friendly. Say, look, Uche, what have you gathered? And I will always tell him something improved from what,
Yeah, improved by like 100,000
I
naira.
know. I mean, there was all kinds of things about 100,000, 155. Now, that kind of odd numbers and everything. Oh, at a point, he would just bang the phone at me and say, are you an idiot? I will in Swallow Market. I will in Creek Road Market. Are you an idiot? Don't worry, you will not hear from your sister again. And he will go quiet for a few days.
And
And
then and then I would now receive threats.
yes.
At one point, they took me to a mangrove swamp at the back of the house. And so that's where they had thrown the bodies of people whose families tried to be smart about ransom. And that's where I was going to wind up. They showed me pictures of people, women who had been violated sexually, and it was really, really terrible. And I actually, at that point, pretty much sure that I was going to go down. I was so bitter against my friends. Like, that's true. I just thought, why don't they just pay this
Yeah,
money and get me
I
out of
know,
here?
and you will continue to go to Nasiru. Go to Nasiru. I said, I just returned from Nasiru's house. He just traveled to Dubai, and I met his oddly, and they gave me 252,130. Say, what? That is what they gave me. Say, have you gone to Rotimi Amici? I'm just returning from Rotimi Amici's house. This is how much he gave me, and all of that. And they were all marginally increments, as it were, to the amount of money
It's
I
not
was
just
passing.
only those two. There are many other VIPs,
Yes.
but we don't need to name every single one of them. I was pissed with all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always had a ready-made answer and about the amount of money and at the point, when you will get off the phone, I will tell them, I say, look, this woman has no money. If you continue to keep her there, you are not going to get anything anyway. So I think that you should just leave her to come out and be speaking her grammar. So, and at a point they believed me. And I think it was that belief that slowly and systematically led to, the compromise we achieved at the end of the day.
And you weren't actually acting. You must have sounded very credible because I think I noticed that too. Is that they gradually came to believe that the money in my phone, in my bank account apps, and the money and what you were telling them that I really didn't have money. And in between, we were having a lot of conversations about my life and who I was. They knew quite a bit about me, but obviously not details. And they were very curious as to how someone who grew up abroad and knew all these people and had a nice house, family home in Port Harcourt, could be so destitute. And I said, look, a lot of people you think are rich are not as rich as you think they are.
Absolutely.
They may have a nice home or they may have, studied abroad, but not everybody is rich, is seriously rich. And I told them that they told me a lot about their lives, about how they had grown up very poor and that how I was a multi-billionaire compared to them, which I don't, deny. I felt a lot of sympathy for them because they had grown up with a lot of disadvantages. And I told them that. And they asked about my son. And I showed them pictures of him. And they'd say things like, hey, yeah, look at his socks. And hey, God, if only. So they used to call me Male, which is the Ijaw word for mother, apparently. And none of them was, I think the oldest was about 34 or 35. And so I was 55 at the time. So I could have been their mom. And they said they wished they had been my son, that my son must have had a very wonderful life. And I tried to console them. I said, well, not so wonderful. I mean, at the moment, he's working in restaurants during school holidays to make extra money because I don't have any money. And so, just paying his fees and everything and his basic pocket money is a lot of stress on me. He said he works in a restaurant. As what? I said, as a waiter. They said, no, Male, it's not true. It's not true. I said, it is. It is true. I said, and I said in Europe, actually, well, I didn't tell them that in Europe, a lot of people from wealthy homes are made to do menial jobs to teach them the value of money. I just said, we need the money. We don't have millions of dollars abroad. So my son helps out. And I said, and he's not unhappy about it, He's not unhappy about it. So when you were talking to them, did you feel any sympathy for them?
Oh, I think at a point, either out of genuine sympathy or as a strategy. I had to sort of, talk to them about the country. And when they talked about $3 million, I remember telling them, look, listen, under Buhari's administration, it was Buhari said, I said, if you
Yeah,
really,
just come.
yes, if you really find $3 million somewhere, give me. I'll be more than happy to come and collect. So and there was this thing about blaming government and blaming the next person about what the situation has become, and I made them understand that all of us were in the same boat in terms of what the country has become and the economy and everything. We
Yeah.
discussed about this so often that they started believing what I was telling them. So, which was helpful in trying to practically, make suggestions. At the point, they were making suggestions about how to mobilize the money. Say, have you spoken to other journalists? I said, journalists?
Mm,
Journalists don't have money.
mm.
But let me even try because whatever suggestion they gave me, I took them up religiously and made sure that I had a feedback. Maybe I said, okay, let me go and speak to some journalists, some of your colleagues, and in 3 hours, I would come back to them. And in 3 hours on the dot, they will call to get a feedback. And of course, I always had something to tell them, which sort of impacted on the amount of money. Slowly, slowly, slowly. I think at a point, they began to feel that I was telling them the truth and that I think that I mean, I may be wrong here, but that they didn't want to hurt you. They really wanted money. What they really wanted was money. And when they found out that I was genuinely helping to mobilize the money, they told me, that assured me, say your sister will come back. Your sister will come back. Just go and round up things for us, and your sister will come back. And that was very reassuring. And that also helped, the efforts I was making, mobilizing the money, to make sure that they had it. And, that was it.
I think they also got a false idea about my wealth from the amount of noise in the media
Yeah.
because they were very plugged into the media. They had a radio in the hut. They also had people on the mainland who were watching TV, and my case was coming up every hour and even on foreign channels. So I told them that, look, you can be famous or well known at least without having a dime.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that I got that feedback also. It was very very regular in the media, and someone. I mean, I knew you. So I was telling them, look, listen, ignore what is happening in the media. I know this woman had no money. So there was this risk, or there's this tendency or possibility of persons to sort of look at the visibility your issue was enjoying in the media to sort of equate it to how much money they could make out of it. But like I told you, I'd received the training, so I didn't waste time in telling them, say, look, listen, she is on every media platform. She's so famous, but listen, she's just speaking English. She had no money. They didn't believe me initially, but I think at the point they believed, and that was sort of helped, sort of temper their kind of demand
Expectations.
expectations. Downgrade
Yes.
their expectation from $2 million. I think they came to 100 million. You know, and they were on 100 million for a while before they came down far, far, far lower.
And I don't want to flatter myself too much, but I think one of the reasons they wound up accepting quite a small sum of money, really, was that because I had befriended them and I bonded with them. And they were surprised when I told them that I was there when Tom Polo and Ateke Tom, when the Niger Delta militant leaders went to go and sign the amnesty agreement in the villa, that I was in Chief Clark's house when they came to report to him before going to the presidential villa. And they realized that I was a real, genuine Niger Delta activist because all this, you might recall, all this kidnapping and everything started because people from oil producing areas were angry that the wealth of this country was flowing out of their zone while they suffered downsides like pollution
Yes,
and
absolutely.
they were poor.
Yeah.
And so when they realized that I had been one of their people up there who had tried to fight back and tried to sort of like seek equity
Yeah.
and fairness and justice. They were, I think they were more inclined to say, okay, we'll take a token sum of money. We will stop thinking about killing her, because they do kill people sometimes.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. They threatened severally. Say,
Mm.
look, listen, shut up your mouth.
Mm.
Maybe your sister will not come back, and nothing will happen. And they had this. Another thing is that they had this impression about security agencies. Who warned me severally. They said, look, listen, I hope you're not speaking to any security person. I told them, well, I didn't even know any security person and everything. I think that was a time security, they had this, confrontation, if you like, with the security. I don't know which one.
And they killed a few police.
So, they sort of called me that evening. They said, Uche, you sent security. I said, me, security. Say they will finish them. Haven't they told you what happened? I said, no, I don't know. Indeed, I didn't know what happened. I had to ask a few persons, for them to tell me. I mean, they told me that security agencies wanted to sort of, come close to.
Perhaps you would like to talk a little bit about that from the outside, because I know I was later told that the family was advised not to involve the police, the army, or anybody.
Yes, absolutely. We didn't. We didn't involve the police, the army, or anybody. I was speaking to them. They were happy speaking to me. They warned me. And like I told you, at a point we became friends. So whatever rules they asked me to observe, I did observe. To make sure that we get the result. They had assured me that your sister will come back alive. So Uche, don't worry, you're a good man. Your sister will come back alive. Go find the money.
And after 13 days, finally, Uche and themselves were able to come to a compromise. So, Uche, I was just thinking, one of the things about Nigeria is that we've had a security crisis now for like at least 10 years, if not longer.
More, yeah.
Yeah? And one of the things that people who don't live here will be wondering is, what role do the law enforcement agencies play in situations like this? It seems as if you, my sister, and the other people who were advising you did barely refer to the police. Did you relate to them at all while I was in captivity?
I think one person from the security agencies did contact me, and I sort of felt that in the conversations, my telephone number was on pause. I mean, they're probably listening to some of the conversations. I don't know which security agency, but I think they were listening to the conversation. But the important thing is this: it's about the trust of the people whose relatives, whose friends, whose mothers, whose fathers have been taken hostage. The trust they have with security agencies. I think that the general impression is that they want their relatives, their parents, their mothers to come back safe.
So there's this perception that the police or the army or whoever are more of a liability than an asset.
Absolutely.
In that situation.
I think that, what they want, for me, for instance, what I wanted was for you to return home safe. I cancelled my trip, and I felt that it was going to be very frustrating if I don't conclude this and you come back home safe. So, and those who were holding you hostage were already talking to me, and they're already assuring me your sister will come back safe and everything. And I think that for me, candidly, there was very little incentive to involve the security agency.
But I don't know why. I just felt that they would make things worse. And I think that may be a bit unfair. And let me seize this opportunity to say that the then Inspector General of Police, Arase, and the then Commissioner of Police in Rivers State, Mr. Kimo, they were wonderful to me when I came out. So I don't want to make it look like the police are totally useless and heartless. But there is this fear that if they get involved, you might be in worse trouble.
Yeah, I think that the people, the kidnappers themselves, sort of worsen the situation by warning you that, look, listen, if you involve security agencies, you will regret. You and the security agencies will regret. first of all. So, and I think that the objective, my objective, is for you to return home safe. And this sort of impression they create that they're the ones who were in charge of your safety. So there was no incentive, as it were, to involve any other person. And again, because when security agencies, for instance, when you were still held, remember there was a time I told you there was a time they called me to say, look, listen, yeah, I know you spoke to security agencies and they came today. Didn't they tell you that we dealt with them? Of course, I didn't speak to any security agency and I denied when they told me. So, sort of, because the terrain where they keep some of these hostages, and I'm sure you can testify to that, are not the most impressive of terrains. So, even the security agencies themselves struggle. Aren't you better off speaking, if you have the privilege of speaking to these guys?
Well, one thing I will say is that the network, the intricate network of creeks and mangrove swamps, it's like the kidnappers, many of whom are local Niger Delta boys, they are far more familiar with that terrain than the police are.
That's the point. That's what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, while the police would have the best of intentions, they don't understand the terrain. So, as a sister, as a brother, as a friend of someone who's taken hostage, what will be your key objective? Is for the person to return back safe. And I mean, especially when it doesn't cost you too much. And I mean, I'm not encouraging people paying ransom and everything. But hang on a minute, you put it on a balance. You want your sister, your friend, your brother to return home safe. So, if this is what guarantees it, why not?
There's a small awkward issue, which is that some people even think that the police collude with kidnappers sometimes, and that you can't even be sure if you involve the police that the kidnappers won't hear about it through a back channel.
Yeah.
So there's that trust issue as well. There's lack of trust in their competence, in their geographical awareness, and in their integrity.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. So this sort of makes it very complicated. So when you have a privilege, you get the kind of call. By the way, I call it a telephone call from hell. If you get that kind of call, you better stick to the rules. They sort of rule out the rules and regulations you must have.
Was there ever a time when you wish I had called someone else?
Yeah, because I sort of felt a burden that if I bungle this guilt is going to last with me for a lifetime. So I said, hang on a minute. Out of all her friends, and I know that so many of them, how come she chose me? How come? And at the point, I said, I wish I had traveled. Because if I had traveled, I could explain. But remember, it was that evening I was trying to think about, am I traveling? Am I not traveling? Lo and behold, the telephone call went through. Yeah.
Okay, well, we could talk about this forever, and I will say, as well as a very frightening experience, it was very interesting. I learned a lot about how ordinary people live. They told me so much about their lives, and they learned a lot about me. And I felt a deep empathy with them when they asked me questions like, is it true? Some of them wanted to live this life of crime. And I can tell you they would not have been criminals if they had had a better chance in life in a country where the elite actually gives a damn about poor people, right? And some of them said to me, is it true that in the UK you can be a taxi driver and earn good money every week and not have to beg anybody for a job or get involved in crime? And I said, yeah, it's true. So it was a very enlightening experience for me as well as a traumatic one.
I'm happy they kept their word, and I think that if there are alternatives created for them, these guys, some of them will be rescued from this criminal lifestyle for something more productive.
And I think that's a good point on which to end. Let me just hug you and thank you again for everything. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're
Thank
both
you.
still alive. That's a miracle.
Thank you. Yeah.
9 years have passed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that's it. It's a wrap. Something happened, which my friends later told me. They were very, very frightened that they knew this would happen and they were frightened that it would be the end of me. And what was that something? It was when I got tired of the whole situation. I was fed up. I snapped. I lost my temper. Of course, boss man had been smoking and Kenne had been smoking Igbo and drinking one terrible kai kai or illicit gin. And they were talking rubbish. Kene was saying, I will sleep with you tonight. Boss man was talking his own, and I just completely lost it. I said, you know what? Fuck off. Fuck you. Kill me now. Kill me now. I said, you call yourself soldiers because they like to call themselves soldiers and generals. I said, you call yourself soldiers, you call yourself generals. Which kind soldier or general? I have been to Bosnia. I have been to the war in Ethiopia. I've been to Israel. I know what a general is, and you are not it. Just completely lost my temper. And I looked at me, I said, go kill me. I'm ready. I've had enough. Kill me. Now, this is the thing my friends said they knew would happen at some point. That at some point I would lose my temper and tell them to kill me, and they might they might agree that I should be killed. Anyway, they didn't. Instead, they all fell silent and looked at each other. And after that, they started calling me Madam General.